good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning. And we are going to go ahead and do a few tests to make sure that everybody here is connected on the panelist side. And we're also going to do a test with our attendees to make sure that everything is working properly. So for those that are in our audience today, welcome. My name is Nate Thomas. I'm the Education Programs Manager for the Clinton Foundation. Welcome to Zoom. If nobody has been on this platform before, I wanted to give you a brief introduction of how you can interact with us today. We are so excited that we've got a great turnout. We have over 43 people here already. We're expecting a few more. But if you're tuning in from a computer or a phone, there should be a menu bar at the bottom of my video screen that has Q&A and chat. Those are two ways that you all can connect with us throughout this conversation. If you have any questions at all, there is a Q&A button. We encourage you to submit questions through that. We have people looking and monitoring that box for questions. We'll be answering those throughout the presentation. And if you have a conversation or question you want to ask the panelists that's not Q&A, you can also chat with us, and all the panelists are seeing your messages. So you've already been pretty active already, so thank you for saying hello. There's a few more features that I wanted to make sure everybody knew about. We're not going to use the poll today, but that's a feature that you might see at the bottom of your screen. And I believe that runs a lot of the housekeeping on the attendee side. I wanted to introduce our panelists today and make sure that we're all connected. Of course, the man of the hour is Mr. Steve Segal, and I wanted to make sure that he is on. I see him, and can you say a few words to make sure we got your audio?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Hi.
Great to see you, Steve. How are you?
And you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think everything is going well. Awesome. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
You're welcome. All right, so I think we are all ready to go. So thank you again, welcome. And for those that have just joined, welcome to our webinar, Like It's 1999, Animation with Steve Segal. We will be here for about an hour, giving you guys a conversation and workshop about the history of animation, Disney, and Pixar. I have some staff here today as well. Sharice Cross, our assistant manager, Christina, an intern of ours this semester, and Cassie, our associate. They'll be working with you guys on Q&A and the chat feature. So if you see Christina or Cassie, they are part of our team as well. And we're going to go ahead and start our presentation. If we can get the PowerPoint shared, I think that'd be a great place to start. Well, welcome again. We're going to go ahead. We're going to have a presentation that's going to be moderated and presented by Steve Segal. And we are going to go ahead and get started. As you can see here, we have our opening slide. You can see to the left one of my favorite animated characters, Buzz Lightyear, posing ever so safely with his mask with Steve Segal. And we're going to go ahead and show you a bit about why we're doing this workshop here today with our next slide. We have a temporary exhibit here at the Clinton Center. I'm not sure if anybody has had a chance to visit it, but if we are able to open in time, our exhibit is called Like It's 1999, the American pop culture in the 1990s. I was born in 1988, so this exhibit is really important to me. A lot of these movies, TV shows, technologies really define my childhood, and the exhibit is a lot of fun. It features movies, like I said, TV and technology and fashions of the 1990s. And the best fact about this is that Toy Story came out in the 90s, and it was the first feature film length animated film in history. And we are so honored to have an animator here on. Sorry?
First computer animated.
Computer animated, exactly, thank you. And we're really excited to bring a wonderful talent here today to talk to you guys about his experience in the industry of animation and his works on not only Toy Story, but Brave Little Toaster and A Bug's Life. So I think our next slide has a few more images of our exhibit, but it is a wonderful exhibit. It's fun, it's bright. You can see here some movie posters of the 90s, Home Alone. We've got a few others here on the bottom, trying to move my stuff around to see it. A League of Their Own. And I think we've got one more slide But with that, Steve, I'd like to hand it off to you and give you the spotlight. And just wanted to welcome you for being here today and looking forward to the great workshop with you.
All right, well, thank you. Yes, I was an animator on Toy Story, and I was fascinated with computer animation from really the late 70s. And in fact, I had a program that ran on the Commodore Amiga computer, and I made a film that was actually in film festivals, and I think that helped me get hired at Pixar. I was really fascinated with John Lasseter's early work before he worked at Pixar, and with computer graphics in general, and how it could be used better than it was used at the time, which is mostly for very mechanical looking things, very robotic things. And so what John Lasseter was doing was very interesting to me, and I kind of bugged him a lot. And what I thought I'd do to start this show is just run my reel, at least the part of my reel that has the two Pixar features I worked on. I think there may be, is there? Yeah, I think there's just the two features, or we're just going to show Toy Story first. I think that's how it's going to work. So these are just my shots. All right, so this is, of course, very early in the film, and that was actually early in the production. I did these little characters. This was the musical number, Strange Things Are Happening. And this is, I remember I was sharing this shot with Karen Kaiser, really talented animator, and we had to make sure Bo Peep was holding her staff the right way. I'll talk about that shot later. I had to animate all those little cups and things by hand, even though they're, even back in, the early 90s, they had programs that could do that, but it just took too long. They had algorithms, so I think they liked it better. John Lasseter was trained as a traditional animator. He drew, by hand, and he, as I do, like to have full control over the motion. When you let it be automated, what's called in the industry called dynamics, where you can say, oh, this object has this amount of weight, and there's this amount of gravity, and this amount of friction, and then the computer calculates, and you can do marbles, and you can have things knock into each other, and it's quite fascinating. But sometimes you want things to move in just a certain way that isn't maybe exactly the way it would move in reality. I think that's part of the magic of films like Pixar films. Is that there's a kind of computer animation called motion capture, which is akin to rotoscope, which maybe I can talk about later. And it's fascinating, but it doesn't give you the same response that looking at something that was animated by an actual animator. As an animator, I'm biased, of course. But what we were going to show now is the progression of several of the shots, and I think even if it runs choppy, I think you'll get the idea. So maybe we can go to the next video.
Yes, we're queuing that up right now.
Okay. So typically I will spend. I think I did a calculation, and I would get about a second a day. So if I had a 5-second shot, it would take me about a week. And early on, we did work 5-day weeks. And then as we got toward the end and we realized we're not going to make the deadline, we worked Saturdays, and then we even worked like part of Sunday. But that's not unusual in the movie business. So there you can see this is a progression of, I'm sort of improving the snake, how he curls, and that was pretty tricky. I don't want to go into too much detail, but they didn't have the controls that they have now. There's the finished shot, and a lot of the work that I did was cut off. These were so easy to do. All you have to do is just bounce them up and down. The trick was the fire truck which I don't know if you can see there, but it didn't rotate on its wheel. Computer objects generally rotate about their center, so I had to kind of do recalculation on how to make it rotate, look like it was pivoting on the two wheels. This is a fairly complicated shot, mostly just because, I'll tell you the story about this, as I was describing it to Pete Docter, and you might want to just pause this. And he was the animation, this sequence supervisor on that. I guess he was really the animation supervisor for the whole film. And Pete Docter, of course, is since become, he's now running all of Pixar. And prior to that, he directed Monsters Incorporated and Inside Out and Up. So he's extremely talented. He wrote and directed those. So I said, well, I'm going to have him, reach over and grab the seatbelt and pull it up. He just asked me what's going to happen in here. And then he said, is that all? I don't know if he said it quite like that. He said, that's all? And I kind of took that as a sign that maybe I wasn't doing enough. And I said, well, maybe he can give the seatbelt a little pat, like he feels satisfied, because if you remember the movie, Buzz Lightyear, Woody wants to hide in the back, and Buzz Lightyear says, no, there's no restraints. So he has to put on a seatbelt, and then he gives a little pat. And I think that's a nice little touch that helps the shot. But I'll give credit to Pete Docter. He had the good sense to kind of prod me to do a little bit more with that shot. I don't know if you can see those red things that look like pins sticking in Buzz Lightyear's eyes. It looks really painful, but that just shows us where he's looking. Yeah, I mean, at one point I had him kind of do a little self-satisfied wiggle, and that's what you're just trying different things. You'll act it out. Normally you'll just take a video camera or just look in a mirror and act it out and try to feel like, well, if I was in this situation, what would I do? And then you just try to figure out, how you can animate it as best you can. The tools were relatively crude. I can say for about the seatbelt, I think they're just trying to figure out how to go through this. We're going to look at this stuff later, but the seatbelt, they remember that in the early 90s, the computer graphics tools were fairly new, and something that curves like a seatbelt, something that bends. They had hard surfaces pretty well down, which is why Toy Story was a good subject for toys. Toys was a good subject. But the bending of the seatbelt, they just didn't have good controls. It was really hard. I also did some scenes in the finale of the movie where there's a chase scene and there's a strap on the back of the moving van. Luckily, it's moving pretty fast, so you can't see how crude that is. But yeah, those things were pretty hard to do. They've gotten so much better now. Even on the next movie, on Bug's Life, they had a lot of these tools, leaves that could wave. But that was fairly hard. You'd think animating Buzz would be the hard part, but I think I spent more time just trying to bend that seat belt.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to ask if I can take a minute and try to get the original Toy Story reel to play. We're going to give it one more try. I think we might have figured out what happened.
All right.
And I have a couple of questions for you, Steve.
Yeah, I can answer some questions.
Okay. What animation program do you use?
Right now I use different programs. I'm doing actually a hand-drawn piece in a program called OpenTunes, and I use Blender and Maya. Now, at Pixar, they have a proprietary system that's not really available unless you want to do rendering. Then they have something called RenderMan that's available for purchase. But their animation and modeling programs are only used within the company.
Okay, and I have another question from Karen on, was it hard to animate cars and suspension?
Cars, and what was the last word?
Suspension.
Suspension. Not too difficult. Usually, because a car, even if you're going to animate like a suspension, I assume you mean like the bounciness of a car. It's fairly limited what it can do, unless unless you're talking about the film Cars, which I didn't work on, where they have a personality and there's lots of flexibility. But a car which is rigid, in Toy Story, the cars are fairly rigid. It's not that difficult. Even when you have a scene, I think I have one or two scenes where there's several cars on the road, and they're putting on the brakes, and you have to make it look believable how it slows down. It's really, you're just animating one or two curves. We use these things called motion curves. But for a character, a bipedal character like a human, you've got shoulders and hips and clavicle and neck, and I mean everything kind of moves together. If you think about the way a person moves, that there's a lot of different movements. I mean, when you just consider the hand, you don't usually move that, you move it, you move, each finger moves a little bit independent of the other to look believable. So yeah, that's much more complicated. I have some scenes with Scud the dog, and where he's chasing the RC car, and I found that relatively difficult. I was telling you, I said, I had a cat growing up, but I never had a dog, and I never really studied dogs. And I actually said, maybe you should give those scenes to somebody else. And they're good. Pixar is good about that. They do want to give you something you feel comfortable with. So I had, I think, 2 shots with Scud, but most of the shots other people animated. I do remember that Pete Doctor did a Scud running cycle, and then everybody who had a scene of him running, chasing the moving van or the RC car, they would just use Pete's animation. So you could just grab his animation and you could stick it into your shot.
Okay, just one more question, and then we'll take some more later. Michael asked, what part of the truck at the end of the movie did you say was crude?
Okay, say that again.
What part of the truck at the end of the movie did you say was crude?
Crude. I don't know if I do. Do you get the question? Maybe you can rephrase the question if you understand it, because I don't think I.
Okay, so Michael, maybe send us another question, okay?
I think I made a reference to there's a handle that's like a fabric. It's like a heavy fabric that you pull down to pull the door down, and in the end of the movie, Woody's hanging on to that, and it's sort of flapping in the breeze. And I don't remember using the word crude. I might have said that. I think maybe if I did use the word crude, I was referring to the controls to make something, do something like that. It was real difficult. Luckily for the truck, I didn't spend that long. I spent longer on that seat belt. For that, it was just because it's curved. When you move a shoulder, it's a direct rotation. Shortly after Toy Story, they started making things where you could actually bend. I remember seeing, I think it was on Chicken Little. I saw a presentation about the Disney film Chicken Little, which is not a Pixar film, that they could, like an arm like this, a bicep would be rigid on Woody. They could bend it. Now, of course, everyone can do that now, but at the time, that was kind of new technology, making a flexible bone.
That's awesome. Cool. If I could interject briefly, I'm going to try to do that Toy Story reel again. And for those that are new to the room, welcome so much to the Clinton Center's webinar. It is like it's 1999, and we're featuring Pixar illustrator Steve Segal. He was an animator in Toy Story, and he also worked on the movies The Bug's Life and Brave Little Toaster. During this webinar, we encourage you guys to ask questions. This is really a space for you guys to ask an expert, right? Steve is not only an animator, but he's a former educator at the California College of Arts as a professor of animation. So again, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna now go and attempt to replay the Toy Story reel and see if we can get any audio with that. So let me give that a try. And
got a friend in me.
Not aired anymore! That's the whole barrel!
I have been chosen. Farewell, my friends. I go on to a better place.
Marie Antoinette and her little sister.
From now on, you must take good care of your toys. Because if you don't, we'll find out, Sid.
Oh, Bo. There's got to be a less painful way to get my attention.
Merry Christmas, Sheriff.
Say, isn't that mistletoe?
so Steve, I can throw it back to you and we can pop up the PowerPoint. I think we left off at some of your animations from Toy Story, drawn images, I should say.
We were looking at the progression, and do you want to go back to the progression? I think we've got one or two more.
Yeah, let me give that a try.
That's definitely a progression. So you can see how primitive these look. The computers back then, this is 25 years ago, were slower than, less powerful than an average smartphone. So we had to limit what we could do. Especially you want to get as close to real time playback, which we couldn't do, but this is the best you had at the time. So you can see, I think this is part when the storyboard, they look at each other, but that was cut. So it happens. They wanted to keep the film down to a certain length. They wanted to minimize the amount of rendering, and then of course the exhibitors want to keep the showtime shorter so they can get more screenings in a day. Back when people went to the movie theater. Let's hope people will go back. So this is, it starts with Woody sticking his head up, looking up, and then Buzz putting on his seat belt. And you can see there's a little body language in there. There's where he's giving it a pat. Yeah, I don't think we're seeing every frame, but yeah, I think you get the idea. There's the little wiggle. And yeah, I think we can just move on. You just keep playing it. And this is the rendered version.
Steve, I have several people want to know what your favorite scene to animate in Toy Story was.
You want to pause this, and I can. Boy, that's hard. Favorite to animate. Well, there's one coming up that I really like. So we'll see that. I think it's right after this. And here's Slinky Dog saying I should have held on longer. And then the glasses. Maybe you can just jump back just a couple seconds. Lenny, those binoculars. Yeah, just can you hit pause? I know we tried this yesterday, and the pause, you were able to do that. So, so let's just go up to Lenny. I want to make a little shout out to one of the great masters of the art of animation is Joe Rampt. He's no longer with us, but he and I worked. I met him on the Brave Little Toaster. He was the head of story on Brave Little Toaster. And the reason I mention him now is he's the voice of those binoculars. He does voices in most of the films because he's a real character. He did the voice of Heimlich in A Bug's Life, and he also did Wheezy in Toy Story 2. So he's a wonderful guy, one of the most generous guys. He was, I don't want to go into too much detail, but he was a very selfless person, funny, friendly, always there for you. So I miss him a lot. And so, when I heard his voice on there, I thought I'd give a little shout out to Joe. He's anybody who's ever worked with him will have only good things to say. So let's go back to this. This is one of my favorite shots. And I remember John Lasseter saying, anytime a Potato Head is hit and his parts fall off, it got a laugh. And this got a big laugh. And in fact, this particular shot, I had 2 ideas. And they do listen to animators. The story department usually comes up with that. There's the finished shot. Now, if we go back to the beginning, and so actually, you see those shoes there. I suggested that, when he gets hit by the RC car, that we keep his shoes there and then maybe drop the hat down on top of the shoes. And they realized that was going to take not really very long. It was just going to take a few seconds. Not a few seconds, a few frames, probably maybe 3/4 of a second. But you had to beg for that. Because as I said, they were trying to keep the film length short. The rendering time was really, really difficult. It was a real challenge with the power of the computers they had then. And Pixar, we think of Pixar as this behemoth of a company, but it was a tiny little startup. All they had done was commercials. I mean, they had done state-of-the-art work. They were, within the industry, Pixar was known as a place that did quality work, but they weren't making any money. The commercials were not even breaking even. But they did have, Steve Jobs owned them at that time. Pixar, to give you a little history, Pixar was started by George Lucas as the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics Division. And he had this thought that maybe he could use computer graphics for the special effects that were so prevalent in the Star Wars movies. Now, as we know, they are. That's everything. That's the computer graphics are, 90% or 75% of special effects today. But back then, it didn't have the believability that he was looking for. So he said, gee, it's just not working. And so he got rid of it and he sold it to Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs had a different idea. He had an idea that sort of allied with Ed Catmull, who was the first person hired by George Lucas when he was putting together a team of computer graphics whiz to build this computer graphics division. And that's Ed Catmull, who is one of the great pioneers of computer animation. And he's also, like Joe, he's a very good guy. I remember him saying, my door is always open. And I did. I went over to his office and he said, Jared, come on in. What do you want to know? So, so I think a lot of what makes Pixar good is Ed Catmull. So I may have been off what was I talking about? So that's the history. So yeah, so Steve Jobs was putting money into Pixar. The commercials were basically a training ground, so they could train their artists. And that was I did direct one commercial there, but that was after Toy Story. So I wasn't there when the commercials were on. Andrew Stanton, who made Finding Nemo, he was one of the commercial directors. Pete Docter, of course, I've talked about him before. He was also one of the directors of commercials. So also Jan Pinkava did commercials there, who I worked with on the short film Jerry's Game, and Jan was actually he originated the story and was the original director of Ratatouille. And ultimately, he had to hand it off to Brad Bird, who's also extremely talented. So,
Awesome. Do you want to move along to some of your sketches that you shared with us? We can pull those up. It was some images of shirts, a shoe, and some of the cartoons that was, I guess, the storyboard.
Yeah, if we have, I think we've got time. I wanted to just go through that one shot, since somebody asked what was my favorite shot, and just give you a little, just maybe take 2-3 minutes and go through that shot. If we could just play those, the progression of the shot where Potato Head gets hit by the RC car. So one thing that I found interesting about that is that in that shot, the shot has all these characters in the back of the truck, and when the RC car hits Potato Head, all the characters spread apart. There, you can see it right there. Now, I had them run away. I had them, animate away. And John Lasseter said, no, just zip them out. So he's in the clear. So Potato Head's in the clear. And I said, well, they can't run that fast. Their legs are too short. And John said, it doesn't matter. And that is a really important lesson. He knew that even though he wants it to be believable, he's always made sure that things are they can't jump higher than if you imagine Woody as a person, he would only be able to jump so high. He can't jump the equivalent of like 80 feet in the air. So, but that, for humor purposes, you can see that they completely out. They're completely gone. Nobody came back and said, well, that Toy Story was great except for that one scene where all the toys ran too fast. So that was a really important lesson. He really knew. So yeah, and I did animate all those little pieces. I remember making little arcs so they balance on the ground and stuff. And that's actually, in a way, kind of fun. It's a big emotional scene is actually more work, where you've got to get the right expression, and there's a lot of subtlety. I think that I'm better at this. I got several things that were sort of more comical. So yeah, I just want to go into that. There was also the shot. It's not on the progression, but it's in my reel, where all the mutant toys are coming up out of the ground and surrounding Sid. And that has, those toys were really complicated. And that took so much processing. Now my computer, because I had that shot, they beefed up my computer to a massive 64 megs of RAM. Yeah, no, not 64 gigs, 64 megs of RAM. I mean, again, it's a minuscule amount by today's computers, but that's the best they could do at that time. We were using Silicon graphics machines because the PCs were not quite powerful enough. Although I had done a computer film in 1987. I made a computer animated film that played in film festivals, but it was all stick figures, so it was a little easier. But there was stuff available. There was software available for the consumer way back in the late 80s. So it's probably if you want to move on to, and these are not my drawings. When they asked me to do this, I went through my files, my archives, and I went and found whatever I could find. So here's a page of storyboard drawings. Joe Ramp did a lot of storyboard art. Andrew Stanton did storyboard art. And now they've got a storyboard team that doesn't. Andrew is fully occupied directing. I'm trying to remember. Bob Peterson. In fact, the drawing with Woody. The draw, it would be drawing number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like a Bob Peterson drawing of Woody kind of pulling out of the door and the aliens pulling him back in. I can tell you a quick story about this. I remember when and I think it was Andrew Stanton came. They had the claw machine, and it had, like most claw machines, it had a variety of toys, a whole bunch of different kinds of toys. And then they said, we're going to change it, and it's all going to be the same toy. And I go, that is a terrible idea. What are you kidding me? It was so colorful. It was so fascinating. All these different toys, all this variety. And because they didn't quite share with me the whole concept of, like, there is a religious cult. And so it's so much stronger. But that's, again, the greatness of the story department at Pixar that, well, you can see here in this level of the storyboard, it was already the aliens. But I do remember at one point, maybe it was just in the script, because I did get to read the script first day, actually the first day of working at Pixar. They gave me the script and they listened to my notes. I gave them some notes and they took some of my suggestions. So anyway, so there's what the storyboard looks like, and I'm sure you can recognize the scene. This is not my animation. I did do a scene very close to that, you know, when the alien says, I have been chosen. Oh, you know, when they did the aliens, Jeff Pigeon, who's one of the animators, was one of the story artists now. I can't remember who else, but he breathed in, I'll bet Bob Peterson, helium, you know, from those balloons, you know, and it makes your voice go up like that. And that's how they did the aliens. They actually breathed in helium. It's not that good for you. Kids don't do that. So this is just something I found. This is a rigger's handbook. I don't know if you can see me. Here's the actual thing that, and I don't know how I happened to get this. I think I found it lying around, or maybe in a recycle bin, and I went, that could be handy. So it's instructions about how the model is going to move. And I haven't seen this in any of the behind the scenes Toy Story books, so I thought it'd be interesting to look at it. We don't need to spend too much time on it. I don't do this work. I don't do rigging. That's probably my least favorite thing to do. But rigging, for those that don't know, is you build a model, kind of like sculpting a statue. Is the first part. That's the modeling. But then in order to make it so it can move, so it can be animated, you have to put controls. It is a skeleton, and some programs actually call it a skeleton. But you can see here, you've got to figure out, well, how is it going to move? How much is the clothes going to fold? And all these things have to be figured out. It's a massive amount of work, and you want to, as much as you can reuse a character, you want to try and do that. That's why having all these sequels has been good. I mean, all the Toy Story sequels are excellent. I didn't think they were going to be able to top Toy Story 3, but Toy Story 4 turned out to be just as good. And I have nothing to do with any of those. I was at the studio working on Bug's Life when they made Toy Story 2. I gave them like 3 pages of notes, and they took some of my suggestions. But they took everybody's suggestions. I'm not like I'm some like story whiz, but they hire people that know something about cinema, know something about storytelling, and then they listen to them. That's
awesome.
Another thing that's good. Yeah.
Great. Just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody for all of their questions. We've got so many to tackle. Steve, if you're open to it, I'd like to go on to show the Bug's Life reel and then take some Q&A after that.
Yeah, let's do that. That's pretty short.
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull that up for you. I think I've ironed out my technology issues, so hopefully everybody will hear and see this more clearly than before. All right.
It's almost the rainy season. We need this time to gather food for ourselves.
Boy, he runs fast for a little guy.
And is it tribute to Miss Frances.
You're too kind.
Thank you.
Oh, they're all so cool. I can't.
Tell me this isn't true.
No, you don't. This couldn't have happened at a more inopportune time. The last leaf is about to fall.
Is that what we almost did?
Hopper is not going to find out.
Happy landings, Hopper.
Introducing the Taste-Tations, the first hard candy from Hershey.
We're the Taste-Tations.
We last so long and taste so sweet. We're so delicious and sweet. You're all we feed. We're oh so creamy, oh so smooth. We're the first hard candy from Hershey to you.
Butterscotch,
Peppermint, caramel, and chocolate.
Yum dandy hard candy. We're the
Taste-Tations.
New Taste-Tations, the first hard candy from Hershey.
All right, what can we get the questions?
Okay. One question is, what was your favorite scene to animate in A Bug's Life?
I think the scene where the mother is protecting the two children just as the grasshopper feet are coming down. And probably, I think maybe because it's a long time ago, it's hard to remember what. I mean, it's hard work mostly. I remember sweating like, oh my God, because their standards are really high, and everybody, all the other animators are so talented that you feel like, oh, I have to run really fast to try and keep up with these guys. I shouldn't say guys. They had a lot of female animators to keep up with these artists. And I do remember that when I showed that in dailies, Andrew Stanton turned around and said, kids are going to cry. Which is a positive thing, because that was an emotional scene, so that kind of resonated with me. And that's also good. Another thing about Pixar, that they're not too stingy with praise.
Okay, and Ashley has a question of, I guess I always envisioned all animators for a movie together in a big room. Steve, you say you were assigned clips and movements. Does the boss just call up animators and assign different clips? And can you guys work from your home studios?
All right, well, that's an interesting series of questions. We had cubicles. So we were sort of, there was people right on the other side of my cubicle, so I could like stick my head up and see Warren, I think was over there, and Alan, and I can't remember who was on the other side. But so, you could just lean over and say, how would you handle this? And also people kind of milling about. That's something that Steve Jobs was very interested in, wanted to see cross-pollination. Walt Disney was very interested in that when he set up his studio in Burbank, wanted to make sure that like musicians were interacting with artists so they would learn from each other. And but yeah, we would generally work at a computer by ourselves. On Toy Story, they would hand out the shots piecemeal whenever they had something ready, which was difficult because they'd have to get like the models built. They'd have to, you'd think all that would be done in advance, but there's just no time. So they had the main models for the kids that are in Andy's bedroom were built, but then they were rebuilding the Woody and Buzz model because they were in so many shots. And then they were still building some of the humans. The first sequence that was done was the Army Man sequence, because they knew sort of how they would model that, and so they actually did that while they were building the rest of the stuff. The Army Man sequence wasn't that critical how they looked, but how Woody and Buzz and even Ham and Potato Head looked is kind of critically important. I mean, they weren't thinking, oh, we may do 3 sequels, but just to say we got a 90-minute feature. we did have dailies, so the entire animation staff and some of the writing staff would be sitting in a theater, and it was a very funky theater. They had some couches and some chairs, and it wasn't like a real. Now the Pixar that's in Emeryville has a very modern-looking theater, but then it was a very makeshift thing, and they would show the work, and we would interact. We'd just talk about each individual shot. I would usually keep a pad of paper with me and make notes. So it was about half and half. I don't know if I got all the questions answered.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. And several people want to know, how long did it take to animate Toy Story?
I'm sure there are people that would answer that better. Let's see. I think we worked about 2 years on it. I think overall it was about 2 years of animation. Prior to that, there was a lot of story development. There was kind of famously a shutdown. If you haven't heard that, Disney looked at, before it was animated, when it was just in story reel, basically filmed or videoed panels of the storyboard, all cut together with a scratch track. Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter basically playing the characters. And everybody looked at it, and Disney said, well, it's not a very good movie. And ultimately, they had, what had happened, Disney had given them a lot of direction. They wanted the film to be edgy. They wanted to appeal to teenagers. So they didn't want the characters to be cute. So they kept pushing Pixar to make the characters edgy. And Woody was mean. Woody was kind of nasty. And so John said, this isn't the movie we wanted to make. This is the movie that Disney told us to make. And Disney said, let's shut it down. And John said, look, give us 2 weeks. We're gonna lay everybody off except for the story people. So for Andrew Stanton, Joe Ranft, Pete Docter, and we're gonna sit down and we're gonna rewrite the whole thing. And they did. They rewrote the whole thing, and they were able to make the movie that you see now. Thank goodness for that.
Okay.
So it took that, and that really, if you want to make a quality film, you got to figure that's going to happen. That happens to every boy. I remember reading about the making of The Wizard of Oz. Oh my God, it's a miracle that film got finished. There's so many problems. I mean, they went through like 4 different directors. It looks so seamless, but yeah, it's a lot of work. So that was before I entered. By the time I got in there, they had a green light from Disney. They had already animated the Army Man sequence, and so I think from when I started, it's about a year and a half of work from. Okay. And they brought a whole bunch of animators. I think they brought like a dozen animators in when I came in.
Awesome. Well, for the sake of time, we'll stop Q&A for the moment so we can work through some of your commentary, Steve, on the animation of the grasshoppers, if you're okay to start that.
What do we have? Is this the I think I just as soon take the questions. The grasshoppers is, again, just something that I found. This is the grasshopper flight manual, kind of funny, and it's got information about how a grasshopper flies. But I think we can just, if there are more questions, if that's okay with you, Nate.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we had, you had the option to kind of speed through and get to the Q&A. We've got plenty to address. So do you want to tackle a few more?
Okay.
Sure, yeah. I think that's why people came. So.
Perfect.
Okay, one of the big things people want to know is how can they get started now as a young person? And then if they want to become an animator, what kind of training, what kind of college should they look for?
That's a good question. I'm sure a lot of people have that question. There are a lot of different ways. Of course, now, I mean, right now, in this exact month or this time of year, or this time of this event we're going through, people are working at home. And so that's a great way to start because there's free software. I mentioned earlier Blender, which is a highly regarded 3D program, very similar to what's used at Pixar. Completely free, has a tremendous user base and lots of people there that can answer questions. All those kinds of programs have a very steep learning curve. There's no such thing as one that can do that kind of work that's easy to learn. If it's easy to learn, it can do very limited things. So, and there are programs, you know, just go online and research those programs. And I don't know if you ever put a link. I sent a link to, you know, the Clinton Foundation of a YouTube video that I have nothing to do with, but it just had 5 free programs. And so that's a great way. And I think that's as good as anything to get you started. And there are lots of schools. I can really recommend CalArts, which is the school I used to teach at, but also where John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Joe Ranft, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird all went to CalArts. It's the school that Walt Disney started. It's just a few miles north of Los Angeles. So I highly recommend that. There are schools up here. I'm in the Bay Area. I worked at the Academy of Art University. I worked at California College of the Arts. They all have animation programs that are pretty good. There's a really good school in Canada called Sheridan that I've seen excellent work from. And I've seen excellent work come from Ringling. The Ringling School, which is basically clown college, you know, from the Ringling Brothers. But they've got a really very excellent training program. If you're talking about international, Goblin School in Paris is amazing. I'm in awe of the work that comes out of that school. Also, the National Film and Television School in England, really good work.
Okay.
So yeah, don't wait. Get on and start working. If you don't have even a computer, get a little pad of paper and make a flip book and try and learn how to tell stories and how to stage. There's so much stuff that's available. It wasn't available now. I mean, you can just go online and there's a really nice video called The 12 Principles of Animation. And I think if you just type that in, you'll get a really good explanation. There's also great books. Richard Williams, who's the animation supervisor on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, has a book and a series of videos called The Animator Survival Kit. Highly recommended. And two of the best animators who ever worked for Walt Disney, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, have a book called The Illusion of Life. It's a great book, especially about acting. Talking about, you know, making a character to life, making them do believable acting. You can't do any better than Frank and Ollie's book. So yeah, and now for me, yeah, I think the film that I made, and I made it on my own time, between Brave Little Toaster and whatever I did next, I don't remember what it was. I made a film called Dance of the Stumblers that got shown at a big computer graphics festival, and John Lasseter saw it there, and a lot of people saw it. So that's a great way to get some attention. And you know, just if you've got good work, if you've got a good idea. I just finished a film called Misfit, and I was going to send it to festivals, but the festivals are kind of closing down, so maybe it'll come out in a few months. We'll see. Any other questions?
Okay. Last one, unless you want to stay, those that want to stay a little longer are welcome to.
No, I'm happy to stay and answer questions.
Okay, what is your favorite animation project to do?
Well, obviously, Toy Story was a great project to work on. All of them are special in their own way. Toy Story, because that's the one that gets people's attention. You know, I guess I can say I worked on Pee-wee's Playhouse, and people go, "Whoa, really? Oh, I love Pee-wee's Playhouse." But Toy Story is the one that, you know, a lot of people said that got me interested in becoming an animator. I think the commercial project that is the most me was I made a series of films for children for Philips Interactive. And this was before there was CD-ROM, there was something called CD Interactive, CDI. And they pretty much let me do whatever, and I had a staff. I hired animators. Actually, one of the people I hired was an artist named, straight out of college, named Rich Quaid. And then when I got to Pixar, Rich Quaid was one of the top animators there. And I think my very first dailies, sitting in the dailies, the first shot that came on was a Rich Quaid shot. So it's a very small community. But anyway, yeah, I look back at that. It was very low budget, very low res. But yeah, it's got the kind of stuff I like to do. And you know, I mean, my own personal films where nobody's looking over my shoulder. I just make them for myself. Dance of the Stumblers, I think, is a really great film. You can find it on YouTube. Red Ball Express, which was actually drawn directly on 35mm film, and my new film. I hope it does well in festivals. I think it's a good film. Misfit. It's actually a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and he gets separated from the other pieces. So.
Okay, and on the flip side, what was your least favorite movie to animate?
I've been so lucky. I've been really involved with great projects. I know I've done some little projects. I had a studio, and we had clients who would keep changing their mind. And you know, when I was fairly new to the business, I didn't know enough to, they'd say, "Oh, can you do that?" And I go, "Well, yeah, it's animation. Sure, we can fix that." And I like to pride myself in being clever, being able to make changes. And after a certain point, you go, we keep having to remake this film. I'm going to have to charge you for that. And they go, "Well, wait, I didn't know that." So now, and then later I learned to say, here you put your initials on every panel of the storyboard. So they say, "Oh, no, he should come in from the left, not the right." Now, well, here's your initials on the storyboard. He comes in from the right, and if you want to change it, it's going to cost you. So I can't even remember the projects. I mean, I guess I love the people at Sesame Street. I love that I had freedom. I had a good friend write a piece of music for me, and I loved the piece of music. And the people at Sesame Street said, we don't like that music. And they got, I think it was Joe Raposo, who's a really respected composer. I think I can't remember what he did. But he wrote the song, and it's not bad, but the piece is Animal Books. But I love the piece that my friend wrote, and I actually did a storyboard, story reel with his music, and I still love that. So that was a disappointment. But I still like the piece, and I think Sesame Street's a wonderful program. So
I want to be selfish here for a second, interject a question of my own. For all the students here in the room, Steve, what one piece or two pieces of advice would you want to provide to students who are creative, who are inspired by your work? What advice would you give to them if they want to pursue a career in animation?
That is a great question, and it does remind me, I was thinking of that last night. And yeah, I can give you a very succinct bit of advice, which is do more than is expected. So if they give you a shot and they say, "He needs to do this, this, and this," and then as you're working, I say, "Oh God, what would be better? This." I mean, obviously you want to if it's a big change, you want to get it approved. But what Disney used to call plussing. Try to take whatever you're given and make it a little bit better. And I think that's the big difference between film, like a Disney film, and some of the lesser studios or Pixar film and studios that aren't quite as good. I mean, I think most of the studios are really good. I think the work from Sony is really good. Illumination, maybe not as much plussing going on at Illumination, where the minions come from. But I think most everybody knows about that. So do more than you're asked to do, and yeah, try to think about it. I've heard Brad Bird say the same thing and talk about working with his mentor, who was a great Disney animator named Milt Kahl. and he was saying like, doing Brad Bird doing his impression of Milk Call, saying, well, did you consider all the possibilities? So that's what you have to do. Consider the possibilities and figure out what's the best way to do it.
Okay. Elizabeth has stuck around to ask the question, was it easy making Buzz?
Making
Buzz Lightyear.
Buzz Lightyear?
Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I didn't build these models, but I can tell you that Buzz was a particular challenge. I remember there were storyboard panels where he's saying like, okay, you know, now you've got to, you know, he'd cross his arms and he'd be stern, say, you know, you've got to get yourself together. And he had this big barrel chest, and it was actually hard to do that. I think in the first, this is a good quick story. In the storyboard, when Buzz Lightyear first appears, and I think Rex goes over and hugs him and says, "I'm so glad you're not a dinosaur," you know, because Rex is all insecure. He's afraid he's going to get replaced. And because Rex is a T-Rex, he's got these tiny little arms, and Buzz has this big barrel chest. And when you're drawing it, you could just cheat it. So they made these arms that were big enough to hug Buzz Lightyear, but when they tried to animate it, it's like ridiculous. So I don't remember who animated it. But he just had him shake his hands. Oh, I'm so glad you're not a dinosaur. It's kind of the same thing with Potato Head says, I remember, but no. Anyway, I can't remember the order of things, but Potato Head, who's the voice of Don Rickles, he's angry and he says, "What are you looking at, you hockey puck?" And which is something Don Rickles used to say, just as he say these silly non sequiturs. And the hockey puck it's really a hockey puck, and he just shrugs his shoulders like, "Oh, I don't know, what am I doing? I'm just a hockey puck." And they realized that they built the model, but he didn't have hockey pucks. Don't have shoulders. Well, they don't have arms, but so Hal Hickel animated that, and he just had his arms go. He had his hands like this, and he had his hands turned like that. Pretty clever. Hal's brilliant. He's a really good animator. He's working at ILM now. He won an Oscar for, I think for one of the Spider-Man movies. So no, I'm sorry. No, he won an Oscar for Pirates of the Caribbean. I think the second one. But he just had this idea: just rotate the arms, and it kind of looks like he's shrugging. So you have to be clever. The storyboard artists can drive you crazy because they can just draw whatever they want. When you get to animating it, it becomes a little more difficult.
Okay, we're only gonna have time for one more question. And Stephen Baker has asked, how do you color your characters?
Oh, well, you know, in computer graphics, they come colored. If you want to get into the details, there's sort of textures or materials that are applied to them, and you can specify if it's shiny or dull or has pit marks on it or whatever. They get more sophisticated every year. In terms of like traditional animation, I worked the old-fashioned way, drawing on paper and then coloring it on plastic sheets called cells, and we would use a kind of a sort of an acrylic paint. And you'd actually ink it on one side of the sheet, flip it over, do the color on the other side of the sheet. And then there's also 2D animation programs where you can just do an automatic fill, or you can build objects. I think anybody who's played with it, and if you watch the videos, you'll see there's, a lot of these cartoons will build a figure, say like BoJack Horseman, they have like a little bit of textured color in there, and they'll put a spine in there so they can move it, and so the color, which includes that sort of modeled texture, can move with it. So you don't have to color it. You just have to animate it. It's like animating a piece of cutout paper. So this computer gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can also color something that has a ramp, has a graduated color. So it can be light on one side and dark on the other, which gives some modeling. Oh, there's an excellent film that just came out at the end of last year called Klaus, film made in Spain, all about the origins of Santa Claus. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. So good. And Sergio Pablos, the director, he figured out, he drew it on paper, but then he did all this special kinds of shading, and it looks gorgeous. And it's a really great story. So go see Klaus.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Segal. I think this was a tremendous workshop. I'm going to watch Toy Story this weekend. I don't know about all of you, but I'm just so inspired to rewatch these films, knowing a bit more about all the work it takes. 2 years to make a film, the team of people behind it, the story about Pixar. I really hope everybody here in the room took something from this, some inspiration, some knowledge. And we're going to be posting this online. We're going to do some edits and make this kind of fix the video issues on our computer side. So when you guys rewatch it, you see the reels with the sound. I hope you guys will take a look. We'll be sure to email that out to you in a few weeks. But with that, I wanted to give you the last word. Steve, you wanted to say a few words of goodbye, and we will close our workshop for today. Thank you all for being here and being great participants.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate everybody showing up and expressing an interest and a passion for animation. I think the industry needs all of you. It needs people who are going to create the art, and of course we need people who will sit in the theater and watch it. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you so much, everybody. We see all your comments. We appreciate you for being here. Stay safe, and we look forward to providing more webinars for you in the near future. Thanks, and have a great day.